Okay, so there is a new Iraqi film. It's called The President's Cake, and it's making a lot of waves. And here's what the movie's about. It's about a little girl whose job it is to bake a cake for Saddam Hussein for his birthday. And you don't see Saddam in the film, but his face and his presence kind of looms over the entire movie. Dalia Al-Dujaili is a writer who has thought a lot about this. She's also of the Iraqi diaspora, and she's here to talk about how important this film is for Iraqi cinema. I got a lot out of this conversation. I hope that you do too. Let's go. Dalia, how are you? Welcome to Commotion.
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me, Elamin.
Yes, of course. Listen, this film is getting a lot of love from many different communities. It won 2 awards at last year's Cannes Film Festival. For anyone who hasn't seen it, can you just briefly tell us a little bit more about what this movie is about?
Yeah, of course. So The President's Cake is about 9-year-old Lamia who lives in the southern marshes of Iraq, and she's chosen to bake a cake for Saddam Hussein's birthday. It's a task that becomes somewhat a dangerous search in Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq, for ingredients like flour and sugar due to the sanctions of the first Gulf War. And she's joined by her friend Saeed and her pet rooster Hindi.
That's like you describe that, and there's like a gigantic smile on your face. You sort of is the tone and overall sweetness about this mission. Is that the thing you're reacting to there?
I just think that description in itself is just such a sweet, heartwarming story, despite the fact that it's set in such treacherous,
Yeah.
quite dark times. But I think just me being able to say, on air that this is a story about an Iraqi girl is quite powerful for me. Growing up, I didn't have any kind of this representation, so I'm just really proud to represent the community, really.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, but also like connecting with what it means to be able to talk about this film. One of the most memorable parts of this film is that relationship that you just mentioned there, the relationship between Lamia and Saeed, especially they're like these lovely like little staring contests where they just wait for one each other to blink. What can we learn from these like really tiny, really lovely little interactions?
Yeah, I mean, kind of similarly to what I just said, I think what we learn about this story is that at its heart, it's about young love. It's about your first school crush. It's about overcoming adversity, and it's essentially about kids on a road trip. These are very universal stories. They're universal experiences that almost everyone can relate to. This story could really be set anywhere. It just so happens that it is set in Iraq during the sanctions under Saddam. It's a very clever way of telling the world what Iraqis went through during that time in a very human way. I think what Hassan has done so well, he's showing very diverse audiences that Iraqis, in many ways, are just like anyone else. We're people, we're humans. Our stories deserve to be told just as much as European or American stories.
So Saddam is everywhere in the film, but never directly. His face and the suggestion of his rule is always kind of like looming in the background, ends up creating this sort of claustrophobic feeling. What about that makes it so effective, you think, that approach?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite aspects of the film. Hassan's visual storytelling is so clever. It's effective because it perfectly illustrates the feelings that many Iraqi civilians had at the time, including my own family, who were living in Baghdad at the time under Saddam's rule. So it really shows that dictatorship is not just about the possibility of death or exile. Mostly, it's actually just about feelings of anxiety, being worried or afraid for your families and your loved ones. And that's exactly why dictatorships are so powerful, because they control through fear. Everyone was anxious at that time that their neighbor was spying on them or that their phone lines were bugged. So this visual aid of Saddam's face constantly popping up, in and out of the frame, it really ominously reminds us of his omnipresence and this idea that he is always there and he's always listening.
And I think like if someone is not Iraqi, maybe they don't have the specific context of Saddam's birthday being something that is like it was a notable part of his rule. You talked about how like your mother left Baghdad partly because of Saddam's birthday. Do you want to talk about that story? What's that story?
Yeah, absolutely. Side note, thank you so much for pronouncing Baghdad and Iraq so
Of
perfectly.
course.
And yeah, I think when I say this, when I say, my mum left Iraq partly because of this, it's a bit of an Arab exaggeration, but there is a lot of truth to it in the sense that my mum did flee Iraq because of the dictatorship in general. She felt extremely uneasy about being encouraged to support Saddam, given that his war with Iran, which she was personally very opposed to, as were many Iraqis. And she found it ridiculous, essentially, that she was forced to celebrate someone's birthday that she didn't know. And it was just a small part of a much larger, much more tense feeling being in Iraq at that time. It was just kind of a story to me that really stuck because it was indicative of the anxiety that she felt being in Iraq at that time, hence why she felt the need to leave.
There are some people that are maybe very surprised that an Iraqi film is getting so much attention right now. Why is a movie like this shot in Iraq, by the way? Why is that so important for this moment? And what were some of the challenges in getting it to this place?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think I can't stress enough how important and how significant it is that Hassan chose to shoot this film in Iraq, a feature-length film.
Yeah.
Many Iraqis, both at home and in the diaspora, rarely see Iraq on screen. If they do see Iraq on screen, it's usually through the Western gaze, it's through, photojournalism, through media coverage of war and conflict. It's very moving and empowering for us to see this representation through a local lens. Hassan is Iraqi born and raised, and he only left Iraq to go study in NYU. So this is a very Iraqi perspective. Making a film in Iraq comes with huge challenges. As Hassan told me in my interview with him for a Rabbit's Foot magazine, he said things that took 5 emails in New York take weeks in Baghdad.
Hmm.
But he also told me that he would rather risk not making the film at all than to make it somewhere else. If Iraqi filmmakers can't shoot in Iraq, then who will? This isn't just about one film, it's about contributing to an industry and inspiring others.
Dalia, in the piece that you just mentioned, where you talked to Hassan, what here I wanted to read back what you wrote. You wrote that the world that he's depicting in the President's Cake is, quote, a world in which moral decisions are constantly negotiated, bent by necessity. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so what I meant by that is, during the 1990s, I want to remind people that about 1.5 million Iraqis, that's the kind of estimate that we have. We can never know for sure, but around 1.5 million Iraqis, including 565,000 children, died as a direct result of the US imposed sanctions. So it's important to understand that sanctions are often much more devastating than weapons, than being in the direct line of fire. And so many more people actually perish under the impact of sanctions. So within this world, we see that a character, such as a pregnant woman who is in the film, is forced to sell her body to a baker in exchange for a bag of sugar. This is something that many of us can never imagine doing. And she ends up actually giving this bag of sugar to the children so that they can bake their cake. But I just think that, again, Hassan is just such a genius at being able to explain such large, devastating, overwhelming political ideas through very personal, very human stories. So I think that's what I meant by, this idea of being bent by necessity and your morals having to be constantly negotiated. And I think that's something that people in the region still have to do till this day.
So the way that Saddam sort of looms over the film, so does the eventual U.S. invasion in 2003 of the film, because you don't see that in the film. We're not quite there yet, but you also know that that's a thing that's going to happen. And obviously, you can't predict the world that a movie is going to be actually released into. But right now there is a war in Iran, right? And so there is a bit of chaos happening. I'm wondering what you think of the timing of this film and what it says about the moment that we're in right now.
Yeah, obviously, it's hard to sum up in just a few words, the feelings
Yeah.
around current conflict in the region yet again. I think, what the timing of the release of this film tells us is how often, unfortunately, history repeats itself. What's happening in Iran, in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Iraq, and in the Gulf is horrific. And I think it reminds us that war truly has no victors. There are no winners in war. Everyone loses. And I think films like this remind us, films like The President's Cake, remind us that, children are always needlessly on the front lines. I think that's why it's so important that we have two children who are at the helm of this film. It feels kind of helpless sometimes, and it feels kind of ridiculous to be pushing films, art, and culture when people are dying. But I do wholeheartedly believe that films can also change people's attitudes and perceptions. And I think what film does is that part of that kind of think global, act local ethos or belief system.
Dalia, to bring it back to Iraq and Iraq right now, I started reading your book yesterday, which is just an absolutely brilliant book. It's really lovely so far. But I also want to say that Iraq has also undergone so much change since the 90s when this movie kind of takes place. What are some of the ways that sort of like aspects of this film show up in the Iraqi diaspora like today, do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a lovely question because just to kind of note, I was born in diaspora. I was never born in Iraq. I never lived in Iraq. So I have inherited my Iraqi identity, Iraqi history, Iraqi heritage through my parents and through my family's stories. I visited Iraq a few times, but that's kind of the most contact I get with my homeland. So a lot of my Iraqi identity is built by these stories that are passed down through generations. One of the stories that my mum loves to remind me of is a pickup line that I love telling people, and anyone that listening that knows me will be sick of me by now. Uh, I love this pickup line because basically it was, yeah, like it kind of appeared in during the sanctions, during the first Gulf War, and in Arabic it goes. لعد قالوا ماكو كيك ماكو شكر بالسوق لعد هذا كيك man, which in English means they said that there was no sugar in the market, so where did this cake come from? And I really urge listeners to use that pickup line next time you're at the bar. But um, yeah, I think what that pickup line does really beautifully is it turns quite a devastating situation into something lighthearted and humorous, something that you can use to survive. It's a survival mechanism, it's a coping mechanism. Humor, Iraqis have humor as a major coping mechanism throughout the years, through many wars, through many conflicts. And I think it's something that we still do to this day.
Yeah.
It was kind of at the end of my thought, but I think that kind of pickup line, for example, like I said, is just a really beautiful way of showing how the Iraqi identity, it just endures so much. And I think till this day, we can see how it carries on to evolve and survive throughout so many decades of conflict. And yeah.
I just imagining people using that line at a bar tonight and try just to see how it goes. And you know what? I'm going to report back. I'll let everyone know to use it, and I'll let you know what they say. But in the meantime, Dalia, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Elamin. It's a pleasure.
Yes, of course, it's been wonderful. Dalia Al-Dujaili is a writer, editor, and producer based in London. The President's Cake is in select theaters right now. That is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then.